Sarah Martinez stepped onto the downtown subway train with heavy feet and tired eyes. She looked exactly like what she appeared to be, a small woman who had just finished a very long day at work. Her blue nurse scrubs were wrinkled and stained from 12 hours at the hospital. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun with loose strands falling around her face. She carried an old brown purse that had seen better days and wore white sneakers that were comfortable but not pretty. The subway car was filled with the usual evening crowd. Office workers in suits checked their phones. College students listened to music through earbuds. A few older people sat quietly reading newspapers. The train moved through the tunnels with its familiar rumbling sound. The lights flickered occasionally as they always did on the old subway cars. Sarah found an empty seat near the door and sat down carefully. She placed her purse on her lap and held it close to her body. Her shoulders were hunched forward like she was trying to make herself smaller. She looked down at her hands and noticed they were shaking slightly. The long day had been harder than usual. 3 emergency cases had come in during her shift. She had not eaten lunch and barely had time for a coffee break. Other passengers glanced at her briefly but then looked away. In the big city, people learned not to stare. Everyone minded their own business. Sarah appeared to be just another tired worker heading home after a difficult day. Nothing about her suggested she was anything more than what she seemed. A small, exhausted woman who just wanted to get home safely. Across the train car, 3 young men were standing together near the center doors. They wore expensive sneakers that looked brand new. Gold chains hung around their necks and caught the harsh fluorescent lights. Their clothes were designer brands with logos that cost more than most people made in a week. They looked confident and moved through the train car like they owned the space. The tallest of the 3 men had a spider tattoo on his neck that was clearly visible above his collar. His name was Marcus, and he considered himself the leader of the group. The second man was shorter but built like someone who spent hours at the gym. His arms were covered in tattoos and he wore multiple rings on his fingers. The third member of their group was younger than the others. He had nervous energy and kept looking around the train car like he was watching for something. Marcus noticed Sarah first. He nudged his friends and nodded in her direction. They began to study her carefully. They saw a woman who looked tired and alone. She appeared vulnerable and unlikely to cause any trouble. Her small size and exhausted appearance made her seem like an easy target. They whispered among themselves and occasionally pointed toward where she was sitting. Sarah felt their attention but tried to ignore it. She had learned long ago that sometimes the best response was no response at all. She focused on her phone and pretended to read text messages, but she could feel their eyes on her and it made her uncomfortable. The train swayed as it moved through the tunnels and she gripped her purse tighter. The 3 men began to move slowly through the train car. They were not walking directly towards Sarah, but they were getting closer. Marcus led the way while his friends followed behind. They stopped to talk loudly about meaningless things, but their eyes kept returning to the tired nurse sitting by the door. Other passengers began to notice the situation developing. A businessman in an expensive suit glanced up from his newspaper and frowned. He saw the 3 men moving toward the small woman, but then looked back down at his paper. A college student wearing headphones caught sight of what was happening but turned up her music and stared out the window instead. An older woman, sitting 2 seats away from Sarah, gathered her belongings and moved to a different part of the train car. She did not want to get involved in whatever was about to happen. This was normal behavior on the subway. People protected themselves by avoiding trouble rather than confronting it. The train pulled into the next station and several passengers got off. The car became less crowded, which made Sarah more visible and more isolated. The 3 men saw this as their opportunity. Marcus smiled at his friends and they began to move more purposefully toward their target. Sarah continued to look at her phone, but her awareness was heightened now. She could sense the men getting closer. Her breathing became more shallow and her hands trembled slightly as she held her phone. To everyone watching, she looked exactly like a frightened woman who had no way to defend herself. The train doors closed and the subway car lurched forward into the dark tunnel. The fluorescent lights flickered again, casting strange shadows throughout the car. The rumbling of the wheels on the track seemed louder now. The 3 men were only a few feet away from Sarah and closing the distance with each step. Marcus looked back at his friends and grinned. This was going to be easy. The small, tired nurse looked like she would not even try to fight back. She appeared to be the perfect victim, someone who would do whatever they told her to do without causing any problems. They had no idea how wrong they were about to be. The stage was set for what would become one of the most surprising moments anyone on that subway train had ever witnessed. But for now, Sarah Martinez continued to play her part perfectly. She looked helpless and defenseless, exactly like someone who needed protection rather than someone who could provide it. Marcus took another step closer to where Sarah was sitting. His expensive sneakers made soft sounds against the metal floor of the subway car. He could see that she was trying very hard not to look at him. Her eyes stayed focused on her phone, but he noticed that her hands were shaking more now. This made him feel powerful and confident. The train swayed as it went around a curve in the tunnel. Sarah used this movement as an excuse to look up briefly. She wanted to see exactly where the three men were positioned. Marcus was now only about 6 feet away from her seat. His two friends stood a little behind him on either side. They had formed a triangle pattern that would make it difficult for her to move in any direction. Sarah appeared to study her phone more intensely. She held it closer to her face like she was having trouble reading the screen. Her other hand gripped her old brown purse so tightly that her knuckles were turning white. To anyone watching, she looked like a woman who was becoming more frightened by the minute. The businessman with the expensive suit folded his newspaper and put it in his briefcase. He stood up and moved toward the far end of the train car. He did not want to be close when whatever was going to happen finally happened. As he walked past Sarah, he avoided making eye contact with her or with the three men who were clearly targeting her. A teenage girl who had been sitting across the aisle from Sarah gathered her backpack and moved to a seat near the front of the car. She pretended she was just changing seats for no particular reason, but everyone could see she was getting away from the developing situation. The train car was becoming more empty as people found excuses to distance themselves. Marcus looked back at his friends and nodded. It was time to make their move. He sat down in the seat directly across from Sarah. The seat had been empty since the businessman left, and it gave Marcus a perfect view of his target. He spread his legs wide and leaned back like he owned the entire train car. Now Sarah had no choice but to acknowledge his presence. She looked up from her phone and their eyes met for the first time. Marcus smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that was meant to intimidate and frighten. Sarah looked away quickly and focused on her phone again. Her breathing became faster and more shallow. The second man, whose name was Tony, moved to sit in the seat next to Marcus. He was the one with all the tattoos on his arms and the multiple rings on his fingers. Tony was bigger than Marcus, and he used his size to make himself seem more threatening. He stretched his arms across the back of the seat and stared directly at Sarah. The third member of their group was called Danny. He was younger than the other two and still learning how to intimidate people. Danny remained standing but moved closer to where Sarah was sitting. Now she was surrounded on 3 sides. The only way she could move was toward the door of the train car. Marcus decided it was time to start talking. He spoke in a voice that was loud enough for Sarah to hear clearly, but not so loud that other passengers would feel they had to pay attention. This was a skill he had developed over time, how to threaten someone without making it obvious to everyone around. He told Sarah that she looked tired. He said she looked like someone who had been working very hard all day. His voice was smooth and seemed almost friendly, but there was something underneath it that made it clear this was not a normal conversation. Sarah continued to look at her phone and did not respond. Tony joined the conversation. He said Sarah looked lonely sitting by herself. He suggested that maybe she would like some company for the rest of her ride home. Again, his words seemed almost polite, but the way he said them made it clear that this was not really a suggestion. It was more like a command disguised as an offer. Danny tried to add something, but Marcus gave him a look that told him to stay quiet. Danny was still learning, and Marcus did not want him to say the wrong thing and ruin their plan. The leader wanted to control this situation completely. Sarah finally looked up from her phone. She appeared to be even more frightened now than she had been before. Her eyes were wide, and she looked like she might start crying at any moment. She spoke in a very quiet voice and said she just wanted to get home. She asked them to please leave her alone. This response made Marcus feel even more powerful. He loved it when people begged him to stop. It meant he was in complete control of the situation. He leaned forward in his seat so he was closer to Sarah. He told her that they were not doing anything wrong. They were just trying to be friendly. He said she should not be so unfriendly to people who were just trying to help her. The train began to slow down as it approached the next station. Sarah looked toward the doors like she was thinking about getting off the train. Marcus noticed this and shook his head. He told her this was not her stop. He said he knew where she lived and this was definitely not her stop. This was a lie, but Sarah did not know that. Tony added that it would not be safe for her to get off at this station anyway. He said there were dangerous people at this station who might hurt a small woman traveling alone. He suggested she would be much safer staying on the train with them. Again, his words sounded helpful, but his tone made it clear this was a threat. The train stopped and the doors opened. A few passengers got off, but Sarah remained in her seat. She looked toward the open doors like she wanted to run, but she seemed too scared to move. Marcus smiled because he thought his intimidation was working perfectly. More passengers got on the train, but they quickly noticed the tension in the area where Sarah was sitting with the three men. The new passengers found seats in other parts of the car. Nobody wanted to sit close to whatever was happening. The doors closed and the train began to move again. Sarah was now trapped with the three men who were clearly planning something bad. She appeared to have no way to escape and no one who was willing to help her. Marcus looked at his friends and smiled. Everything was going according to their plan. Marcus leaned even closer to Sarah. He was now so close that she could smell his cologne mixed with cigarettes. She pressed herself back against the window of the train car, trying to create more space between them. Her eyes showed real fear, and her breathing became quick and shallow. She looked like a small animal that had been cornered by predators. The train car had become much quieter now. Most of the remaining passengers were pretending to read or listen to music, but they kept glancing over at what was happening. Everyone could feel the tension growing. A middle-aged woman near the front of the car looked like she wanted to say something, but her husband grabbed her arm and shook his head. He did not want them to get involved. Tony stretched his arm across the back of the seat so his hand was almost touching Sarah's shoulder. She flinched when she noticed how close he was. This made Tony smile because he could see that he was making her more uncomfortable. He told her that she had very pretty hair and asked if he could touch it. His voice was quiet, but everyone nearby could hear what he was saying. Sarah shook her head quickly and moved closer to the window. She whispered, "Please leave me alone again," but her voice was so quiet it was hard to hear. She clutched her purse against her chest like it was a shield that could protect her. Her hands were shaking so badly now that she could barely hold on to her phone. Danny, who had been standing, decided to sit down in the seat right next to Sarah. This meant she was now completely surrounded. Marcus was across from her. Tony was next to Marcus, and Danny was right beside her with no space between them. She had nowhere to go and no way to escape. The train entered a long stretch of tunnel between stations. The lights flickered more than usual and the car swayed back and forth. Outside the windows there was nothing but darkness. Sarah looked toward the front of the car, hoping to catch the eye of another passenger who might help her, but everyone was avoiding looking in her direction. Marcus decided to make his intentions more clear. He told Sarah that she looked like someone who lived alone. He said he bet she did not have a boyfriend waiting for her at home. He asked if she would like them to come home with her, so she would not have to be lonely tonight. The way he asked the question made it clear this was not really a question at all. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She told them she did not want any trouble and just wanted to go home by herself. She said she had to work early in the morning and needed to get some sleep. Her voice was shaking as much as her hands were. She looked completely defeated and helpless. Tony laughed at her response. He said she was being rude to refuse their friendly offer. He told her they were just trying to be nice and she should appreciate that. He moved his hand closer to her shoulder and said maybe she would change her mind if she got to know them better. Danny, who was sitting right next to Sarah, could see that she was starting to cry. Small tears were running down her cheeks and she was trying to wipe them away without being obvious about it. This made him feel powerful and important. He had never been part of something like this before, and he was enjoying the feeling of control. A businessman at the other end of the car stood up and moved toward the door even though the train was still between stations. He wanted to be ready to get off as soon as the doors opened. He could not stand to watch what was happening, but he also did not want to get involved. This was the choice most people made in situations like this. The train began to slow down as it approached the next station. Sarah looked toward the doors again with hope in her eyes. Maybe she could run when they opened. Maybe she could escape before these men could follow her. But Marcus saw her looking at the doors and shook his head again. He told her this was still not her stop. He said he had been watching her for several stations and he knew exactly where she lived. This was another lie, but it sounded believable enough to make Sarah even more frightened. He said if she tried to get off at the wrong station, something bad might happen to her. Tony added that the neighborhood around this station was very dangerous at night. He said a small woman like her would not be safe walking alone in that area. He suggested she should stay on the train where they could protect her. His words sounded helpful, but his smile made it clear he was the one she needed protection from. The train stopped and the doors opened. Several passengers got off quickly, including the businessman who had been standing by the door. They all seemed relieved to be getting away from the situation. A few new passengers got on, but when they saw the tense scene with Sarah and the three men, they moved to the far end of the car. One older man who got on the train looked like he might say something. He stared at Marcus and Tony for a long moment. But then Danny stood up and stared back at the older man. Danny was young, but he was tall and looked strong. The older man decided not to get involved and found a seat as far away as possible. Sarah remained in her seat even though the doors were open. She looked toward the exit but seemed too scared to move. Marcus nodded with satisfaction. He thought his plan was working perfectly. The doors closed and the train began to move again. Now Marcus decided it was time to be more direct about what they wanted. He told Sarah she seemed like a very nice person, and they would take good care of her. He said they knew a place where they could all get to know each other better. He said she would have a lot more fun with them than she would sitting alone in her apartment. Sarah looked more terrified than ever. She appeared completely helpless and defenseless against these three men, who were clearly planning to hurt her. But what nobody on that train knew was that appearances can be very deceiving, and Sarah Martinez was not at all what she seemed to be. Marcus leaned back in his seat with a satisfied smile. He thought everything was going exactly as planned. Sarah looked completely broken and defeated. Her tears had made her mascara run slightly, and she kept wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She appeared to be exactly what they had thought from the beginning. A weak, frightened woman who would do whatever they told her to do. Tony moved his hand even closer to Sarah's shoulder. He was almost touching her now, and she seemed to shrink away from him as much as possible. The seat was small, and there was nowhere for her to go. Danny was pressed against her other side, blocking any escape in that direction. She looked trapped and hopeless. The train entered another dark section of tunnel. The lights continued to flicker and cast strange shadows throughout the car. Outside the windows there was nothing but blackness rushing past. The other passengers had all moved as far away as possible. Some were reading, but others just stared at the floor or out the windows, pretending nothing was happening. Sarah continued to hold her old brown purse tightly against her chest. Inside the purse something was weighing it down more than normal. But the three men did not notice this detail. They were too focused on how scared and helpless she looked. They had no idea that her purse contained something that would change everything. Marcus decided to make his final move. He told Sarah that they had been very patient with her, but now it was time to stop playing games. He said when the train reached the next station, she was going to come with them. He said if she tried to refuse or cause any trouble, things would go very badly for her. Tony nodded and agreed with Marcus. He said they had been trying to be nice, but she was not being cooperative. He moved his hand so it was actually touching her shoulder now. She flinched when he made contact, but she did not try to push his hand away. This made him think she was completely under their control. Danny looked around the train car to make sure no one was paying attention to them. Most of the other passengers were still pretending to mind their own business. An older woman near the front was reading a book. A young man with headphones was staring out the window. A businessman was typing on his laptop. Nobody seemed willing to help. Sarah took a deep breath and seemed to calm down slightly. She stopped crying and wiped the tears from her face. She looked at Marcus and then at Tony and Danny. For just a moment, something changed in her eyes. They became harder and more focused, but the change was so quick that none of the three men noticed it. She spoke in a quiet voice and asked them what they wanted from her. She said she did not have much money and her purse only contained a few dollars. She said she was just a nurse who worked long hours and barely made enough to pay her rent. Her voice still sounded scared, but there was something different about the way she was sitting now. Marcus laughed and told her they did not want her money. He said they wanted something much more valuable than a few dollars. He leaned forward and whispered exactly what they planned to do with her when they got off the train. His words were disgusting and meant to frighten her even more. But instead of becoming more scared, Sarah seemed to become very still. She stopped shaking and her breathing became slower and more controlled. She looked down at her hands, which were no longer trembling. The three men thought this meant she had given up completely and accepted what was going to happen to her. The train began to slow down as it approached another station. Marcus told Sarah this was where they were all going to get off together. He said she should not try to run or scream because that would only make things worse for her. Tony added that they had friends waiting at this station who would help them if she caused any problems. Sarah nodded slowly like she understood and accepted what they were telling her. She adjusted her grip on her purse and seemed to be getting ready to stand up when the train stopped. The three men smiled at each other, thinking they had completely broken her spirit. Danny stood up first to block the aisle so Sarah could not run toward the other end of the car. Tony moved to give her room to stand but stayed close enough to grab her if she tried anything. Marcus remained seated but got ready to follow them off the train. The train pulled into the station and came to a complete stop. Through the windows they could see the platform was not very crowded. This was perfect for what the three men had planned. Fewer people meant less chance of anyone interfering with their plans. The doors opened with their usual mechanical sound. A few passengers from other parts of the car got off quickly. They seemed eager to get away from whatever had been happening. No one looked back or tried to help Sarah, even though it was obvious she was in danger. Marcus stood up and told Sarah it was time to go. He said she should move slowly and not try anything stupid. Tony stood on one side of her while Danny moved to the other side. They were ready to grab her arms and force her off the train if necessary. But something unexpected happened. Instead of standing up, Sarah reached into her purse with a quick, confident motion. Her hand found exactly what she was looking for immediately, like she had practiced this movement many times before. The three men thought she was looking for money or maybe trying to find her phone to call for help. They had no idea that Sarah Martinez was about to show them who she really was. The tired, helpless nurse they thought they had been terrorizing was about to disappear completely. In her place would stand someone they had never expected to encounter. Someone who was trained to handle situations exactly like this one. The doors remained open and other passengers continued to get off the train. But Sarah did not move toward the exit. Instead, she was preparing to show these three men the biggest surprise of their lives. Sarah pulled her hand out of her purse and everything changed in an instant. What she held in her hand was not money or a phone. It was a shiny gold badge that caught the fluorescent lights of the subway car. The badge had the words New York Police Department written clearly across it, along with her detective number and rank. The transformation that happened next was so complete and sudden that everyone in the train car stopped what they were doing to stare. Sarah stood up slowly, but there was nothing tired or scared about her movements now. Her shoulders went back and her spine straightened. The frightened nurse disappeared completely and was replaced by someone who looked confident and dangerous. Her voice when she spoke was strong and clear. It carried through the entire subway car with authority that made everyone listen. She announced loudly that she was Detective Sarah Martinez with the NYPD Special Victims Unit. She told everyone that she was placing the three men under arrest for harassment, intimidation, and attempted kidnapping. Marcus, Tony, and Danny sat completely frozen in their seats. Their mouths hung open in shock and disbelief. The small, scared woman they thought they had been terrorizing was actually a police detective. The realization hit them like a physical blow. They could not move or speak or even think clearly. The other passengers in the subway car were just as stunned. The businessman who had moved away earlier turned around to get a better look. The college student took off her headphones and stared with wide eyes. An older woman near the front of the car put down her book and watched in amazement. Sarah continued to hold her badge high where everyone could see it clearly. With her other hand, she reached back into her purse and pulled out a small radio. She spoke into it with the calm, professional voice of someone who had done this many times before. She requested backup at the subway station and gave her location and badge number. Marcus finally found his voice and stammered that this had to be some kind of mistake. He said they were just talking to her and had not done anything wrong. But his voice was shaking and he looked terrified. The confident leader who had been intimidating Sarah just minutes earlier was gone. Sarah looked directly at Marcus and told him she had heard every word they had said to her. She explained that everything had been witnessed by other passengers and that their behavior constituted criminal harassment under New York law. She spoke like someone who knew exactly what she was talking about because she had prosecuted cases like this before. Tony tried to stand up, but Sarah ordered him to remain seated. Her voice had such authority that he immediately sat back down. She told all three men that if they attempted to leave or resist arrest, the charges against them would become much more serious. Danny looked like he might start crying. The train doors had remained open during all of this. Now other passengers began to realize they were witnessing something extraordinary. A few people took out their phones to record what was happening. Others moved closer to get a better view while still maintaining a safe distance. Sarah explained to the watching crowd that she worked undercover for the Special Victims Unit, which handled cases of harassment, assault, and abuse. She said her job often required her to appear vulnerable in order to identify predators and criminals. She had been trained to look helpless while actually being in complete control of dangerous situations. Two uniformed police officers appeared at the subway doors. They had received Sarah's radio call and responded immediately. Sarah showed them her badge and explained the situation quickly and professionally. She pointed to each of the three men and described exactly what they had done and said during the incident. The uniformed officers moved efficiently to handcuff Marcus, Tony, and Danny. The three men offered no resistance because they were still too shocked to react normally. They kept staring at Sarah like they could not believe what had happened to them. Sarah told the watching passengers that she had actually been observing these three men for several stations before they approached her. She explained that their behavior and body language had identified them as potential predators. She had deliberately made herself appear to be an easy target in order to catch them in the act of criminal behavior. One of the passengers asked Sarah if she had been in any real danger. Sarah smiled and explained that she was trained in self-defense and had been in radio contact with backup officers throughout the entire incident. She said the situation had been under control from the very beginning, even though it had not looked that way. Marcus looked at Sarah with a mixture of fear and disbelief. He asked how long she had been a police officer. Sarah told him she had been working undercover operations for 8 years and had arrested dozens of men just like him. She said predators usually targeted women who appeared weak and vulnerable, but they never expected their victims to fight back. The uniformed officers began escorting the three handcuffed men off the train. As they passed Sarah, each of the men looked at her with shock still written on their faces. They had learned a lesson they would never forget about making assumptions based on appearances. The other passengers began to applaud as the criminals were removed from the train. Several people approached Sarah to thank her for her service and to tell her how impressed they were with her work. An older gentleman shook her hand and said she had made the subway safer for everyone. As the train prepared to leave the station, Sarah sat back down in her seat. But now she sat with her shoulders back and her head high. The tired nurse costume had been completely abandoned. She was proud to be Detective Sarah Martinez, and she had just reminded everyone that heroes do not always look like what people expect them to look. Like the three men who had thought she was helpless were now on their way to jail, and everyone on that subway train would remember forever the night they witnessed one of the most surprising reversals they had ever seen. The subway train pulled away from the station, leaving Sarah alone with the remaining passengers who were still talking excitedly about what they had just witnessed. Several people approached her wanting to know more about her work as an undercover detective. Sarah smiled and answered their questions patiently, but she did not reveal too many details about police operations. A young woman who had been sitting near the front of the car came over to thank Sarah personally. She said she took the subway every day to get to work and often felt unsafe when men bothered her. She told Sarah that seeing her handle those three criminals gave her hope that someone was looking out for people like her. An older businessman who had moved away during the confrontation now returned to where Sarah was sitting. He looked embarrassed as he admitted that he had wanted to help, but was too scared to get involved. Sarah told him she understood completely and that most people were not trained to handle dangerous situations like that one. Sarah explained that part of her job was to blend in and appear normal so that criminals would reveal their true intentions. She said that if other passengers had tried to help, it might have scared the three men away before she could arrest them. She told the businessmen that sometimes the best way to help was to stay safe and call the police. The train continued through the tunnel towards Sarah's real destination. She lived about 6 more stops away from where the arrest had happened. As the train moved, she found herself thinking about the case that had just concluded. This had not been a planned operation, but rather something that developed naturally during her commute home. Sarah had actually been returning from a different undercover assignment earlier that day. She had spent 12 hours working on a case involving illegal drug sales in a downtown neighborhood. The nurse uniform she was wearing had been her cover for that operation. She really was tired from a long day of work. When she noticed the three men watching her on the train, she recognized the signs immediately. Their body language and behavior matched patterns she had studied during her training. She made a quick decision to continue her undercover role and see what they would do. She had been prepared to stop the situation at any time if it became truly dangerous. A teenage boy who had been watching everything asked Sarah if she was scared during the confrontation. Sarah thought about his question carefully before answering. She told him that fear was natural and even police officers felt scared sometimes. But she explained that training and experience helped her manage that fear and stay focused on her job. She told the teenager that the three men had actually been more scared than she was. They thought they were in control, but they were really the ones who were trapped. From the moment she decided to arrest them, their fate was sealed. They just did not know it yet. The train stopped at another station and a few more passengers got off. Those who remained continued to ask Sarah questions about her work. She explained that the Special Victims Unit handled many different types of crimes, but they all involved people who targeted vulnerable victims. Sarah said that predators like Marcus, Tony, and Danny usually followed the same patterns. They looked for people who appeared weak or defenseless. They used intimidation and fear to control their victims, but they were actually cowards who ran away when faced with real opposition. A middle-aged woman asked Sarah how often she had to do dangerous undercover work like this. Sarah explained that every case was different, but her unit tried to be very careful about safety. She said she always had backup officers nearby and multiple ways to call for help if needed. She told the woman that tonight had been unusual because it happened during her regular commute rather than during a planned operation. But she said police officers were always on duty in a way even when they were off the clock. If they saw crimes happening, they had a responsibility to act. The train approached Sarah Station and she began to gather her belongings. The other passengers thanked her again for her service and for making them feel safer. Several people asked for her autograph or wanted to take pictures with her. Sarah politely declined the pictures, but signed a few napkins and pieces of paper. Sarah prepared to get off the train. She thought about what would happen to Marcus, Tony, and Danny. They would be processed at the police station and formally charged with multiple crimes. Because of their threatening behavior and Sarah detailed testimony, they would likely face serious consequences. Sarah knew that cases like this sent a strong message to other potential criminals. When predators realized that their victims might actually be trained police officers, they became much more careful about who they targeted. This made the subway safer for everyone. The train doors opened at Sarah Station and she stepped onto the platform. Behind her, the other passengers waved goodbye through the windows. She could hear them still talking about what they had witnessed as the train pulled away. Sarah walked through the station toward the exit, feeling satisfied with how the evening had ended. What had started as a routine trip home had turned into a successful arrest of 3 dangerous criminals. She had protected other potential victims and sent a clear message that predatory behavior would not be tolerated. As she climbed the stairs to street level, Sarah thought about the young woman who had thanked her earlier. That woman and thousands of others like her would ride the subway tomorrow feeling a little bit safer because of what had happened. Tonight, Detective Sarah Martinez had proven once again that heroes come in all shapes and sizes. Sometimes they look like tired nurses heading home after long shifts, and sometimes that appearance is exactly what makes them so effective at catching the bad guys.